Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Alright, well, it's finally time. We're going to take a look at Super Dungeon Explorer: The Forgotten King from Soda Pop Miniatures. And this is the newest, well, the only other base set of Super Dungeon Explorer since the original base set. There were other expansions like Vondrak Manor and Caverns of Roxor, the Rock Top Gang, but they were just add-ons. They had more monsters, a new boss to fight, and a few new heroes, but you still had to use the same base components. Most of the treasures and loot were the same. Cavern tiles, so you were always either in the Crystal Caverns or the Lava Caverns, which really didn't make sense for Vondrak Manor. And there are other actual haunted house tiles now, I just don't happen to have them, but it was nice to finally have another base set with more tiles, more heroes, new monsters, tons and tons and tons of new content. And I actually got the Kickstarter edition. You can watch my unboxing of it on my channel if you're some sort of masochist. No, my unboxings are fun, come on. But no, there's a ton of stuff that came with the Kickstarter edition, but even just in the base box, if you only took stock of the stuff that comes in the base box for Forgotten King, there's just a ton of content. Now, the number one, I think, selling point of the new set, aside from the models, I mean, all the models were going to look good, people already expected that, was the new arcade mode. This was a brand new way to play the game. The original game was only one versus all. One player was the console who was fighting against the rest of the players taking control of heroes. And if you're not familiar with Super Dungeon Explorer, it's just like full-on, people compare it to like a MOBA, like a battle arena, or just like an old gauntlet style game where just heroes run through a dungeon killing monsters and trying to take out spawn points. Well, originally only one player took control of all the monsters and the spawn points and the bosses and the mini bosses. But now with Forgotten King, you can still play it that way in a revised version with some very significant changes. Or you can play it in arcade mode where it is fully cooperative and the console's role is on autopilot through a deck of cards dictating how the monsters behave. Which means there are different cards for both types of gameplay. I'm telling you, there's a lot of stuff in this. And because there's a lot of stuff in Forgotten King, and because of all the Kickstarter stuff, and some of it got mixed together, and it's just too much for me to cover in one overview, I am just going to give you a very, very quick rundown of some of the new components, what some of the new rules are, just showing off some of the stuff, and it's absolutely not a run-through of how the game plays from turn to turn. I'm sure there are videos for that. I just want to give you a taste of what some of the new stuff is. Then we're going to come back and I'll give you my final thoughts where I will elaborate. Alright, so this is a lot of the stuff that comes in the Forgotten King base set, but it's not everything, and in fact there's some extra stuff here from the Mistborn Coast set I just kind of threw out here just to make it, I don't know, look more impressive. There's more models out here. But as I said in my intro, I just want to give you a taste for what this base set is like. So believe it or not, to me the most notable thing is just getting more tiles for this game. So you do have some really cool new tiles that are a mixture of forests and also ancient ruins as well. And there are new effects. The game comes with a bunch of new effect cards to tell you what all the new stuff do. You have your typical difficult terrain, but you also have like poison brambles, and on some of the tiles you have statues, like champion statues, which are going to increase your combat when you're next to them. Or there's like healing statues that you may be next to as well. So these are much more diverse, they're much busier, there's a lot more going on these tiles, and it seems, than with the original tiles of the base set of Super Dungeon Explorer. I'm just going to run roughshod through some of this stuff in no particular order. The one important thing, and again, I've kind of gone on about this at length, both my intro and my outro, but there's two different game modes. There's classic mode and arcade mode. If something only pertains to one, I'll point that out. One thing that is for both is the Explore deck, and this is an interesting concept in the game, where whenever you get to a new tile that has not been explored before, except for the one that the heroes start on, and remember, if you've played the original Super Dungeon Explorer, you're already 3/4 of the way there. There's some major differences in this set, but you still are going to have a good handle on what I'm talking about. So when you get to a new tile, except for the starting one, you're going to draw an Explore card. Some other actions, and some actions you can take, especially in the arcade mode, will let you draw more Explore cards. And then the card will tell you what to do. It might set off a trap, which you'll actually use these new trap templates for. They're just going to make things more difficult for you, like having bramble walls or spiked floors. Some of them, they'll have special effects. So, for instance, the save point here says that after the spawning point is destroyed, heroes may remove all status effects, or secret code, you add 1 princess coin to the party's backpack. I'll explain that in a second. This symbol here actually means that you're going to add creeps down to the board. Now, creeps are a new type of monster. And there's 2 different types. I think the only one that comes with the base set, if at all, and again, this is because of the confusion of all the stuff being mixed together, but you have these little rabid squirrels, which they come with their own card. The thing about the creeps are they are free activation. So if you have them out on the board, the console, or if you're playing in arcade mode, they'll be activated for free. There's like nothing holding you back from using them, but they are, of course, significantly weaker. So you just have a ton of different Explore cards that you could potentially draw during the course of the game. Now, I mentioned princess coins a minute ago. Princess coins are going to pop out. They have the same kind of symbol as the those coins, the symbol that used to go around the track in the original Super Dungeon Explorer. And what this does is when a spawning point dies, it pops out of it essentially. This is a resurrection. If a hero has been destroyed, you're able to immediately resurrect them, essentially. The game also comes with a card that is the backpack card. This is for the entire party, and essentially whenever you would, during the power-up phases, whenever you get items that are for the community, they can go onto this card, and then you'll decide how to disperse them to the group. So it's just a sort of a placeholder card. There are keys in this game, because now you need to pop open certain chests using keys that you can find during the course of the game. You can either bust open a chest, and yes, the game comes with the chest just like they always have, which also could turn into boo booties, and there's new kinds of those. I'll get to those in a second. Because you can bash open a chest, but then you're going to miss out on some treasure, whereas if you open it with a key, you might get an additional piece of treasure. These little shards here, by the way, are just like sort of random action markers if you need to keep track of something, like if people have activated or not. However, and again, I know I'm going all over the place here, if I may point out, here are some of the new heroes that come in the game. And again, some of these are sort of mixed up. Some of these are promotional characters, stuff that came with the Kickstarter, like Brave Mode Candy, and so on. But here's some from the base game, like the Questing Knight, the Royal Warden. I think the one, well, I know that she does. That's my favorite character, the Thunderveil Huntress. But if you look on their cards now, in addition to other things, you see that they have crystal affinity, and this is going to affect certain items and effects that happen during the course of the game. If you have an affinity with a certain color of crystal, that may matter. You'll also notice, well, maybe you won't because it's really hard to see. I really have to focus in there. It's a really small symbol. You see how there are now swords and little bows and arrows. Let me show you. There you go. See that there? That's because those are like little reminder symbols there. That's what I'm looking for. Those are reminder symbols as to what types of attacks they are. Missile attacks or melee attacks and so on. These are actually 2 mini bosses in the game, but they give you their hero card. So that's helpful. But most of this is actually still the same as the original classic mode of the game. This is the amount of dice that you roll, and here's all the different special abilities with explanations on the back. So, and with the movement and action points, you have the different affinities for the different items that you can get. And I'll show you some of those. These have been jazzed up quite a bit, given some more explanation. There's lots of new and different types of items. Some of them are still keyed into the boss, into the mini bosses that you might use during the course of the game. And some of them are pets, which are a really, really fun addition to the game with fantastic names. Admiral Fuzzybottom, Lord Gruff, I'm not sure where the other ones are, but there's one called just the Colonel. And here I'll just show you are the little miniatures for them. Like there's the Colonel with the eye patch. And they are called Wonder Cards. I assume there'll be more cards designated as Wonder Cards in the future, or maybe in the other expansion sets that are coming out concurrently with this. You gain them, and then you'll gain access to their little pet card. And they're another type of creature that you can use, like a summoned pet that you can, they are pets, that will give you extra actions and help you out during the course of the game. And of course, there's one for Cola, Candy's little pet thingamajig. Some of these are little Kickstarter add-ons. I think these are not necessarily going to come in the base game, although the normal cardboard tokens do. Like these are little health tokens, and I don't actually have the little. Here they are. Here are the little potion bottles that might potentially come with the game. But otherwise, they function the same. Show you some of the different models. Here is the Forgotten King himself, the big bad boss of this set. Here's his boss, or potential hero, I guess. The Trent, also known as the Tree Ant. Then you have Bashful. Well, that's actually not from this set, so I don't want to show that quite yet. Here is Bashful Boris, the Bear Warrior with the club. And here are the, there's a new designation of elite monsters. Here's one of them, the Angry Rabbit Creature. But let's go to the heroes. This is my favorite hero. I already showed her card, the Thunderveil Huntress. I don't know why. I just think that it's an amazing model, and it's just great. I love the theme of it. I love when they do like kind of crazy hero models that are different than all the other ones. So really like that. Here's the Fey Alchemist, who's all about dropping potions and using potion special effects. The Questing Knight with Droopy Lance. Princess Emerald, who's like a sniper, and I love that model too. That's just amazing. There's nothing bad to say about these models, of course. I'll talk about that at length in my final thoughts. Now, the rules for Classic Mode have changed a bit, and I didn't want to go out into it in great length, like I said in my intro, but there's quite a few different things that happen. As you notice, there's no board here. This is a base game, but there's no board that, if you're familiar with the original Super Dungeon Explorer, that shows you going around the track and with a coin, and when you get to certain points, the mini bosses spawn, and anything like that. That doesn't happen anymore. Now, when spawn points draw, and here's one of the spawn points for the Old Growth Hollow, and one of them is for the Knights area. Actually, that one was actually the Bramble Knight. And then you have the Old Growth Hollow. No, that's not it either. They're really hard to tell apart sometimes. Now, there are quite a few differences in the new version of the Classic Mode. While most of the gameplay is going to feel very similar, as you notice out here, there is no like tracker board to keep track of when mini bosses come out, or when the final boss is going to spawn, like the timer, whenever you hit something, it goes up the track. That doesn't exist anymore. Instead, players are going to take their turn, the console is going to take their turn, and whenever you kill a spawn point, one of the mini bosses is going to pop out, and when all of the spawn points are gone, then the Forgotten King, or whatever boss you're using, is going to pop out, assuming you're using the new rules. In fact, how the console takes his turn is going to be different. Now you have a choice. You are either going to activate 4 skulls worth of creatures plus one of the super creatures. Let's see, for example, everyone's either going to be 8-bit, 16-bit, or the super. So here's an example of a 16-bit, and they have little skulls telling you how many skulls they're worth, and you can only activate. Like here's a 16-bit King Sprout, who actually transforms from the original Sprout, who costs you 3 skulls. So you can use 4 skulls worth of creatures during one activation. It could be multiple creatures, but some of the creatures, there's the rabbit squirrel, by the way. Some of the creatures are designated as super creatures, which in that case, you're going to get 1 free activation of one of the super creatures during each of your turns. But that one not counting the Forgotten King, which is his boss card here, who you just get to activate along with everything else. Or if you have multiple super creatures on the board, meaning mini bosses essentially, you can use all 4 of yours to activate the other one as well, but you always get 1 free one. So that's a major difference from the previous game. And in fact, even more significant than that, instead of activating it all during one of your turns in between the other player turns, you can choose just to spawn. And when you spawn, you pick one of the spawning points that's out on the board and spawn every type of creature that's on that card. And if it's a paired spawning point, which it will say on the particular card, and if it's a paired spawning point, then you're actually you have the opportunity to even though you're choosing one particular spawning point, you can spawn the monsters on both of the paired points. So another really significant change in the Classic Mode. And you also have the Mighty Monster card. What this is that whenever you would kill one of the mini bosses, or destroy them, kill sounds awful, then for the rest of the game, all the different monsters on the board, or who are designated as elite or bosses or mini bosses, are going to gain a bonus to their offense or defense, depending on how many times this has happened. And if you get all the way to where 5 mini-bosses are destroyed, the console may choose one status effect for all monsters to inflict when they make their successful attacks. And if you don't have enough models for every spawn point that gets destroyed, every time that one of the spawn points would get destroyed and you can't spawn another mini-boss, this goes up as well. So that could be really nasty. And the final new thing I'll show you for the classic mode, just as far as the rules, I know I'm going pretty quick through this, is that every boss is going to have a boss card, which gives you more special effects on top of their additional character cards. So this one says boss spawn for the Forgotten King. King's Riches, whenever the Forgotten King suffers a wound, the party gets to draw a loot card. But when during a timeout, Last Stand, Forgotten King in Elite and Minion monsters gain a special status effect. And remember, and I think this was in the original base game, a timeout is when you inflict like half of the wounds of the dungeon boss. And the last thing I want to talk about is arcade mode. There's a whole other separate rule book just for the arcade mode rules, and it plays mostly the same as the classic mode as far as what you can actually do on your turn. Oh, by the way, that's another important change. Heroes in this game actually have basic actions. There are very simple things you can do, like basic attacks of different types, and things like kicking open chests. It's another sort of interesting aspect to the game that wasn't there originally. But going back to the arcade mode. In arcade mode, you actually have to use completely different cards because the monster cards are all going to have preset actions that they can take during their turn. And they're also going to have gang rules as well. So here is an example of one of the arcade mode cards, which has a whole bunch of stuff that's just not on the normal mode, and tells you what they can do and how they're going to react when they activate. And also, if they have gang rules, they're going to use the more power, which means they're within a couple of spaces of people who share their card with them, then, or who are from their spawn point, then they're going to gain extra power and defense and range and things like, or usually just power and extra range. And then you have the actual arcade mode cards. Now, what happens here is that whenever it is the console, which is the game's turn in arcade mode, because it's a fully cooperative mode of play, you're simply going to draw one of the cards from the console deck, and that will tell you what to do. In this case, it is move one, use a unique ability, which is the ability in the box, essentially, and then fight, which means that all of the monsters on the board who are on the active tiles being tiles where heroes are, or that are adjacent to where tiles where heroes are, get to first move their movement, use their unique ability, and then fight if they're within range. But other cards might be something like Recover, where they get to remove status effects and then remove a wound token, or Gauntlet, which lets them spawn, then move, then fight. And if you spawn, the spawn point just gets all of its different monsters that are on its card spawning out of that point. The way that heroes' turns work is also drastically different, because how it'll work now is that 2 heroes are going to activate. Like at the beginning of the game, you choose which 2 heroes you want to activate. Then it goes to the Powerup Phase, where every time that you hit monsters, you're going to get loot cards, and there's more loot cards in the game, and so on. And then it's going to go to the console's turn, the game's turn in a fully cooperative game. Then it goes back to the heroes' turns, but now 2 heroes who did not activate in the previous turn have to activate. When you have an odd number of players, this can mean that someone is kind of going to be the odd man out. So then it gets to the next turn, and then 2 more heroes who did not activate last time are going to activate, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that person who is the odd man out. So it's a bit of an interesting turn structure there. But okay, I know I went really quick through a lot of this different stuff, but there was just so much to cover. There's no way I was going to be able to cover it all without this being over an hour long. So that's a quick and dirty run through of some of the stuff and the new rules that come in the Forgotten King box. Let's go to my final thoughts, and I'll elaborate a bit more on this. All right, well, I always start with theme and components, and this won't be any different, but come on. Components, they're amazing. Between this and if you watch my unboxing video, they're just stupendous. I mean, Soda Pop Miniatures has never had a problem with that. I don't know if you've seen the Relic Knights models. I don't think most people have, because no one's talking about that game, and mine are just sort of sitting in my room waiting to be put together, but what I have seen of them are amazing, and Soda Pop has continued that tradition now. And the original models for Super Dungeon Explorer were also great, although in the base set you had to put them all together. Thankfully, with the expansions to that game, and now again, they've done away with that idea. You will not be assembling anything in Forgotten King, and I'm sure that will be a relief to a lot of people. all the models are fantastic. Yes, the rabbits have like a bendy axe, but as you probably saw in my unboxing, but that's not a huge deal, and I think it can be repaired pretty easily. Other than that, all the monsters and the monsters and the heroes are just of utmost quality. I like the cards. I love the artwork. The artwork seems to be even better than it was originally. The tiles look fantastic. I'm so happy there are new tiles. Just from a gameplay standpoint, it's wonderful to have them, but they look great. They look kind of busy at first, but when you get down to it, I'm glad that it looks so vibrant and colorful. They do warp a tiny bit, not really significantly, but more noticeable than the original tiles, which, unless maybe the early production copies of Super Dungeons, the original base set, had that problem as well, but it was somewhat noticeable to me, but not enough that I would be like, oh my god, this game has warped tiles, it's terrible. It's not that bad, but I did notice it. So components, through the roof. Theme is solid too. I mean, look, it's a hack and slash game. You don't necessarily feel a lot of storyline, but you definitely get into that little bit of feeling like it's a battle from a bigger role-playing game. Like you're just focusing on that one battle and playing it out. And I've had games of Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition that went on for like a couple of hours, 3 hours, in which case it really brings back memories of playing with those, of just like stopping, bringing the story to a halt, and having this big, long, protracted battle. But still, in that regard, it does bring out that kind of role-playing theme. And the game actually comes with a storybook. I assume this is in every copy of the game, not just the Kickstarter edition, that tells you more of the history of the world of Super Dungeon Explorer, and I actually appreciated that. Normally, I couldn't care less about this stuff when it comes with games, but I was eager to learn more about it. So, theme and components, solid. Gameplay-wise, well, I'm going to talk about the arcade mode last. That's probably the most significant thing here. But let's talk about the classic mode, because I think a lot of people were probably expecting, oh, okay, the big news here is arcade mode. Classic mode is just whatever. It's going to be the same as before. No, it is significantly different. If I did not make that clear enough in my overview, there's no longer the whole thing of hitting monsters and then you go through a track and the heroes take damage, and then you go down the track and mini bosses spawn at random points in the track. That is all gone. Now it is purely based off of the console takes their turn. They can use this many models or spawn a certain amount of models, and then when a spawn point is killed, mini boss pops out. All the spawn points are gone. Boss comes out. But now the boss and the monsters could potentially get stronger when the mini bosses are destroyed, and the bosses have more special effects from that special little boss card that they have. And then the boss has access to the creeps, which are going to make it just a little more difficult. This balances out how it was before, and there's the rule of the boss getting more activations when spawn points are still around, and all of that is just gone, and thank you. I'm so glad that it's gone. Because, first and foremost, the old rules for Super Dungeon Explorer were terrible. I'm talking about the actual rule book, and they immediately put out frequently asked questions. They put out revised rules. It was awful. And it's not a very complicated game, but they made it more difficult. And I think that some of the clunkier rules, like the track, like the Powerup track or whatever it was called, I don't even remember now, and I don't want to remember, made the game much more clunkier than it had to be, and protracted the game too long for the one versus all, now called classic mode. And so I'm so glad they got rid of that stuff and streamlined it. The hero's turns still activate, or still go basically the same as they did before, but now you have the basic actions, which is another cool thing that also makes you feel much more like you're playing a RPG in a box. So, excuse me, I really appreciated that as well. So really, I am very, very happy with how they overhauled the classic rules. And when you add in all the extra new stuff that comes with the game that's in both modes of play, like the princess coins being the resurrection. So, because it used to be that if a couple of heroes went down, you're toast, okay? Because there's like one charm in the base game that would return a hero to life. So I'm so glad that they took care of that as well. And all the new way that you can pop treasure out by getting the keys, and the Explore deck. The Explore deck is great. That's another added little bit of flavor and theme. So I was really, really happy with all the changes they made to the classic mode. Let's go right to the arcade mode, because this for me was the thing I was most excited about, because I love cooperative games. And sometimes I thought, man, you know, especially when I was playing D&D and Super Dungeon Explorer concurrently back in the early days, I'm like, man, do I really want to play another game where I have to be the DM again? And I was always the console when we played Super Dungeon Explorer with the first base game. So I'm like, all right, cooperative mode. Yes, this is going to be awesome. it's pretty disappointing. And now with the revision to the classic mode, I'm sad to say that there's a big chunk of Forgotten King that I'll probably not be using, and that's the arcade mode. Because it works okay. The idea of it and the how it, on paper it sounds great. The arcade deck that you draw cards from, and all the monsters act off of these pre-prescribed actions. It sounds okay. I was like, okay, I figured it would be something like that, and the gang rules and the different unique abilities. It's all fairly interesting, and yes, there is something to be said for just being able to play cooperatively that makes that mode still appealing even now as I'm talking about it. But unfortunately, it's implemented very poorly. First off, it makes the game much, much longer. And the game is already long enough as it is. Even with the newly revised rules for Classic Mode, you're still looking at like a 3-hour game. Unless you're the console, just murder them very quickly. But with the arcade mode, you're looking at even longer than that. It takes a long time because all the different monsters start out, and a lot of them can activate all at once, and then you might just be spawning more and more and more and more. You really have to take out the spawn points as quickly as possible, and sometimes that's just not possible. Sometimes it's not possible to do it very, very quickly. So it protracts the game too much, having to flip over the cards, figure out what models activate, figuring out how to move them, and trying to be fair with how they move, because essentially you're still playing as the console. You're just trying to figure out how these monsters are going to move based on the card that came out. So that feels a little bit clunky, but the worst part is how the hero and console turns alternate, and how 2 heroes will activate, then the console, then 2 remaining heroes that did not activate before, and then back and forth. That leads to so much downtime between hero turns that it's pretty agonizing. The console turn, or in classic mode at least, yeah, you might be waiting for a little while, but at least it's like, okay, hero, console, hero, console, hero, console. They can go relatively quickly, and you feel like you're always watching the action. Things are always going on. You're having to react, spending potions, and some of that still happens with arcade mode, but especially if you have an odd number of players, things can get weird. 2 players go, the console goes, 2 other players go, and it's like, all right, that if you're playing with 5 players, you could even go theoretically higher, I think. You're like, okay, my turn's coming up next, but then you get to your next turn, and it's like, well, it actually would be better if one of the first 2 guys, or both of the first 2 guys, win again. That's better for us. And it's like, well, yeah, strategically it kind of is. So are you going to sit there again, or are you going to say, no, I'm taking my turn, man? So it's very odd. I don't know why they did it that way. I don't know why you couldn't have kept the same rhythm of console, console, hero, console, hero, console, hero, just like in classic mode, and still have the arcade mode rules going. I don't know why every monster has to start off on the board. A lot of things I think just could have been handled better with arcade mode. And to me, despite all the effort they did to make new cards for everything, just for arcade mode, it just didn't come out very well. But am I giving this a bad recommendation? Absolutely not. If you love Super Dungeon Explorer, hopefully you backed this already, or hopefully you have it pre-ordered, because it's amazing. The amount of content that you get, the new revised Classic Edition or Classic Mode rules, the upgrades for the former cards. There's so much content here. This base game alone would give you hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, dozens of plays out of it. But when you start mixing this together with the original base up and with the expansions, this is just more to love about the game, and it is hard to say no to it. I wish that the arcade mode had come out better, but still, it's fantastic. Super Dungeon Explorer, the Forgotten King from Soda Pop Miniatures. Get it.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.